Yeah, I'm just going to do a little bit of context on Robert Lopez, who's obviously CRO for Justworks. I've known Robert. I think we met at like SaaStr like 10 years ago at a SaaStr event.
A while ago.
Someone told me that. But I've known of him for a long time. I followed the space in the category and seeing sort of Justworks and Zenefits and others and watching sort of Justworks emerge as a category winner there. But, there aren't a lot of sales leaders that can take a company from like inception to, 300-400 million in revenue, right? And sort of survive all those phases of growth. And so I've been a huge fan of Robert's for a long time. And, in my opinion, the two best go-to-market sales leaders on the Eastern Seaboard, in my opinion, are Robert and a guy named Mark Jacobs. I always have to mention Mark. I don't think they mind being grouped together, but they're the two best. So if you're a company that's 0 to 100 million in revenue in software or SaaS, they're the two people I would call. I mean, obviously Robert's got an imminent IPO at some level for Justworks coming. Probably not a super gettable guy, but he's one of the best. So excited to have him on SaaStr, a part of SaaStr. I've been on some stuff before, so excited to welcome him in.
Yeah, I second that on Mark. Great guy. I've known him for a very, very long time.
Yeah. So I already did the bio on me, so we can just
All right. So we just jump in here then, yeah?
Yeah.
All right. So the way we're gonna play this is we have 10 things, kind of things that we wish we knew then that we know now. And I'm gonna hit on the first 5, and then Brendan's gonna hit on the second 5, and then we're just gonna kind of play off one another and leave some time, obviously, at the end to go for it. So first up, a lot of people seen Glengarry, Glen Ross. Everyone talks about ABC, always be closing, and that's important. But I would argue in many ways, especially at a growth company, it's like this always be recruiting aspect. I can't tell you, from like the early days, you have no brand, nobody knows you. You're just basically just sheer hustle with an idea. And you got to figure out what are the hacks to kind of get people interested. And so like one of the things we did early on, and this is like seed stage, nobody knew us, was that we just got like a LinkedIn account. You only get so many LinkedIn messages. And so we would run out of them really fast. And so we would just view like thousands of profiles of people that we thought were great. And then whoever like viewed us back was like a signal. And then we would just try to like focus and use our precious credits we didn't have a lot of money back then. And try to do that. And, there's a few other things just that like I've thought about over the years, which is like, just keep a spreadsheet, right? Like keep a spreadsheet, try to commit and hold yourself accountable of having like one conversation a week, because the best people out there aren't currently looking, but you got to play the long game, and you really, really got to focus on, having those like introductory conversations, and like recruiting is recruiting for a reason. And you really have to find the best people and bring them in, and you can't just like hopefully that they'll apply. And I think that actually holds true even more importantly like now when you're a big company, because we have this like huge recruiting team and people will like reach out to candidates, but the power it holds when like a founder, a CEO or CRO like reaches out directly to a candidate just holds so much more weight. And I think that like to this day, like I try to, when we have roles that we really want to hire, I'll just try to do it myself to the extent possible from a time perspective, and just commit some time there and play the long game on some of these candidates.
Yeah, I'll weigh in. I'm obviously a big believer in this. I've talked about some of these concepts to the point where, everyone's heard it before, but yeah, like it starts now, right? As a VP of sales, and you can't just you can't start recruiting to solve the job opening that just opened. It's a multi-year concept, right? And you want to put yourself in a position where 2 jobs, the relationships you're building today will pay off, 3, 5, 10 years later. And when you start viewing it that way, and I know Robert's team has this incredible team, loyal team, right? People that, obviously if he ever were to do something beyond Justworks, gosh forbid, I'm sure he never will, but he probably knows who he'd hire, right? It's not, he knows the first 5 people he'd hire. And so, for myself, it's sort of the same thing, right? You always if you're a VP of sales and you go to a startup or a growth company, you should have a good idea about who the people that you want to hire before you actually take the job. And if you don't, then you probably did something wrong. So yeah.
Yeah. And it's even the people that leave your company, right? And like trying to stay in touch with those, because like great people will leave, right? They're ambitious, they want to do things, but like staying in touch, because you never know where that path is going to lead. All right. So moving on to number 2. This is like one that is really like, early on we talked about like at seed stage, nobody knows you, but once you can get the marketing engine up and running, like it is like inbound can be like a drug, right? And you like do a big campaign and you have all this inbound and maybe you have like 5-6 reps and like they don't even have time to like get on all the calls. But eventually it just dries up, right? And at some point it'll always dry up, and there's like seasonality in these things. And it's like so important early on to have like a diversified demand gen strategy. And so what I mean by that is like you have your traditional marketing, right? And you have your traditional outbound, but like thinking of it like more holistically, where what are the other like channels that you can generate? And so like investing in some type of a channel strategy, and like every business has something. So maybe there's like affiliate partners, or maybe there's like a brokerage network, or maybe, there are other types of business brokers, or it obviously depends on your industry. But like having like a additional demand channel strategy outside of your traditional just like inbound marketing and like sales generated opportunities is like so critical, because at one point, like one of these channels is going to like fall off, and the ability to kind of balance the different players off one another, these different channels off one another, is going to like be the critical key inflection point of whether or not you hit the goal that quarter or that year. And so like, this is just when I see so many companies like fail to acknowledge. And the challenge with channel is it takes a really long time to pay off. And so it's like a multi-year investment. Yeah. But it's just something that's like tough to see the return early on.
Yeah, you gotta do it all, right? You're gonna have to, like, if you actually want to have a chance, right? You're gonna have to, sort of, marketing and sort of organic growth, outbound partnerships, referrals, everything, right? You got to do it all, because you're not going to get where you want to go on the backs of, sort of a single threaded go-to-market strategy or top of the funnel strategy. So the people that figure that out, ideally out of the gates, but quick, it makes a material difference in what type of outcome you're looking at.
And trying to ensure it's well balanced.
Even more so today, where you have all the different methods and the ways that you can sort of connect with people or touch people, marketing, sales related, they've been mass replicated on such an epic scale that finding new ways to get engagement is, that's like the magic now, in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, and the SEO game is like becomes so expensive to make it, unless you have a really high value product and you can spend the amount of money for those.
Yeah, I've seen unicorns get massive valuations on the backs of like sort of early marketing traction, right? Marketing lit growth traction, where you're like, hey, how field test is that going to hold up? And then it just absolutely hits a wall, right? And then they've raised this massive valuation based on the expectation that will continue or even increase. And it can lead to a very bad situation for a founder. Anyways.
Yeah, and making sure it's well balanced, right? So you don't have like 80, 5, it's 5. It's like, you want it as well balanced as possible. Well, I mean, kind of what Brendan was talking to right there, like really brings to the second point or the third point, which is like payback, right? Like payback is king, queen. Like it is so, and it's like pretty simple when you think about it. It's like, all right, if somebody's paying you $100 a month a seat, right? That's $1,200 a year in revenue. Like how much are you spending? And like, but it's not just how much are you spending on the sales cost, like how much are you spending on the all-in cost? And like so many companies like just don't calculate the all-in cost. They're just looking like, okay, I'm paying my rep X and like here are my Y marketing dollars. But like there are these other extraneous costs that are around customer acquisition. And so once you get beyond that, like first million, couple million in revenue, like you need to figure out like what is the true payback. And it's tough early on because you don't know what is your lifetime value. And so I think that like just for me personally, like going into that, if you have a high lifetime value, like our customers, like our churn is very low, retention's extremely high. Like you can spend a lot, but you can be willing to live with a much longer payback. But if you don't know that early on, right? So you have to make these certain bets, and like thinking about it on a cohort basis for these customers is so crucial. And I think just like going back in time, like really being able to understand and like predict to the extent possible, like what are those churn metrics and those like different buckets on cohorts, because like it can allow you to spend, like you can maybe have an 18-month payback, you maybe have a 24-month payback, right? If your customers are going to stay with you for 6, 7, 8 years.
Yeah. Yeah. It's go to market is expensive. Obviously, every company would love to have sort of marketing led organic growth early, but increasingly that's not the case, right? Where companies are increasingly forced to go outbound, right, to try to manufacture demand. And somebody told me, I'm not sure how accurate it is, but it seems accurate that, on average, like with an outbound SDR, it's like basically like $1,000, somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 cost per sort of qualified meeting. Yeah, that's tough. Most people don't understand how expensive going outbound is. It's expensive. You have to do it, obviously, right? But there's a lot of context and details that go into that. Most founders don't understand that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's these extraneous costs that aren't included in CAC, right? Which is like turnover and churn and training and like all of these things that don't kind of show up in the numbers, but a rep that leaves, you got to train a new person. They got to ramp up for the next 3 to 6 months. So it's just like a really tough element to quantify. And a lot of people just miss that. So moving on to 4. So like this operational infrastructure is so crucial. Like I had the pleasure of like running sales ops at a previous company. And so for me, like I hired my first 3 reps, and like the 4th hire I made was a sales ops person. And it sounds like very early, but if you like these outcomes are very binary. And if you like really want to think about it over the long run, like do not be cheap. And I think going back, I'm like, oh my goodness, it's going to cost me like that $100 a month for the sales nav license. And it's costs like $150 a month for Salesforce. And you think about these costs and like, oh my God, what am I going to do? But like the outcomes are so binary. And so when you think about building an operational infrastructure, like this is the thing that's going to help you scale or not, right? Like this is what is going to like lead to those outcomes, and like having someone there to like really invest in it. And I think a lot of founders are like, well, wait a minute, I just got to hire salespeople. And then what is this, revenue operations and sales ops infrastructure? And it's just like having the visibility and the data and the analytics to be able to, it's like flying a plane blindly. Like it's just so critical. And I think that a lot of folks, or they might hire a sales ops person, but like not do predictive analytics or not think about like statistically significant data. And it's just like something that so many companies miss. And I think there's almost like you can't do it too early. It is kind of the way I think about it.
I would be interested to know what do you value most in sort of like a rev ops leader, right? So I remember when we got acquired by Adobe, basically they said you can find a rev ops person sort of already an Adobe employee, right? But I was really looking for someone to like kind of challenge me, right? Challenge your assumptions, like you want that, you don't just want somebody that's going to like crunch numbers and analyze data, right? But actually somebody that'll challenge your conclusions and push you on some level. That's hard to find, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that like some of the best folks are people who maybe sat in the seat and they were a rep, right? But they have an analytical mind, and like maybe they studied economics or math or something like that, and they like found
that's a great suggestion, by the way. Like that's because I think finding a rev ops person is, you can find that, but finding somebody that that has that viewpoint, where they've, where you can sort of mesh the analytics or the data with, the reality of having lived it, right? And owned a number and understanding the stress and all the stuff that's associated with it. I actually think I've not heard anybody say that before, but that's actually great advice. Yeah.
Yeah. The amount of credibility that they get on the floor immediately. Now it's not like it's, you're not going to find, they're not like all over the place, right? But there are some of these folks that are just super analytically minded, and they like the process piece, and they just gravitate towards like the operation, like the sales flow and like the funnel and like Salesforce stages and their forecast. And so I think that just like that credibility and the ability to like sit in those shoes and like understand what they're going through, because salespeople got to deal with this plethora amount of sales tools today. And it's like pretty overwhelming. And so like having the ability to like empathize and like have that credibility can go at a really, really long way.
Yeah.
So I have one more here, and then we're going to punt it over to Brendan. This is like a little bit controversial. And I think that like, if there are like investors on the call, maybe they won't like this, but so be it. So I think that these like long-term incentives, so obviously a lot of companies will issue equity and there's a vest on it. And so when early on we were thinking about like our business and, how do we think about like, it takes a lot longer at our company, for example, for a rep to ramp. And so if you're in like a more enterprise motion or a very complex sales process, and it takes a little bit longer to ramp. And, when you have somebody who's been with the company 2, 3, 4 years, they generally continue to get better. And they generally continue to kind of like generate more money. Now, maybe their quota doesn't go up at the same slope, but we kind of resorted to like, thinking about building this book of business. And what I mean by that is that like, net of churn, net of expansion. So if you close like $500,000 in a year, after that first year, maybe it's 600, maybe it's 700. And then every year, as you build on that book of business, net of churn, net of expansion, like that becomes very valuable to the company. And so we implemented these mechanisms where as a rep, you can, after certain tenure thresholds, you can start making a percentage on your book, net of expansion, net of churn. And so it aligns incentives such that like if you sign a company and they churn after 2 years, that hits against you. Now, doublefold, if you sign a company and they double in revenue after 3 years, that benefits you. Now you have to continue to hit your quota. There's a minimum threshold for that payment to kick in. But what it's done for us is aligned incentives to bring on like good business that stays with us, that grows. And at the same time, it's enabled reps to basically like generate a lot more income up and above their OTE, assuming they continue to perform. Now, if a rep misses their quota for a quarter, like that can be very painful because they're missing out on a very big paycheck. But what it does do is it's like, especially a few years ago when people were throwing crazy OTEs out there, like it's a way to really incentivize rep retention and incentivize long-term business value creation.
Yep. Completely agree. Yep.
So Brendan, we'll kick it over to you.
All right. A lot of our, there's pretty consistent themes, in my opinion, with the best sales leaders I've known, right? Is that they see a lot of things pretty similar. I think being a VP of sales or a sales leader in a startup or a growth company, it's hard, right? And a lot of times you are working for founders. Maybe that's their first time ever doing it. And so there's this gap between sort of aspiration and like what's possible. Right. And so, some people will say, oh, well, like you can't blame the VP of sales because they didn't have X, Y, Z, et cetera, et cetera. But in my experience in a startup, like you can't say can't, right? Nobody wants to hear can't. And if can't is in your vocabulary, then on some level, it's a tough gig, right? And it's not for everyone. But like you have to replace can't with solutions, right? So if there's a something that's in a hill that seems impossible to climb or an impossible task or whatever it is, you have to come up with solutions. And in some cases that will help lead a founder or CEO to, maybe a more reasonable conclusion, but come with solutions, right? Solutions to problems, I think is in a startup is imperative. And when you're a VP of sales and you're saying, I can't do that because it's just, I don't have a lot of sympathy, right? For more reasons why you'll see in a later slide, but there's, that's generally my worldview there is come with solutions, not can't. Yeah.
Well, one way I think about this is like, you're going to run into a brick wall. Yeah. And so the question's like, are you going to hit the wall and complain about it? Or are you going to like figure out a way around it? Are you going to go over it? Or are you going to?
And you can't just be a yes, right? If you can't just say yes to everything, right? Because you will get walked into, an impossible situation on some level. But yeah, you have to be able to stand your ground on the important things, but do it in a way that has optionality and solutions. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Right. It's like the rep driven, it's like the fictitious rep driven financial model that a first time CFO like builds. And it's like, oh, if you hire 50 reps, like you're gonna be good. And that's where you need to push back, right? And it's like, how do you build like a bottoms up driven model, but how do you build a demand driven model, right? And how do you like build those two independently, but meet in the middle, and like then you basically can like stress test it.
Yep. All right. Yeah. So be friendly, but you're not friends with your team. So, and again, there's all sorts of context to that, but a guy I know is the CRO for a company called ZipRecruiter. This guy, Kevin Gaither, who I respect, was talking about this the other day, but the bottom line is, you can be a player coach, and you can be a, someone that your team respects and maybe loves, but you have to be able to push them, right? You have to be able to hold them accountable. And sometimes that there are uncomfortable conversations to be had there. And sort of once you're over this line of, this is an employee versus a friend, it's tough to come back. So I think that was a learning early in my career. I felt I was a great sort of coach and leader, right? But like I was unwilling to push my team very early in my career and call them out, right? And make them uncomfortable. And that was a learning that is critical, I think, to actually being a leader. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like the best people are the ones that like crave that, right? They crave like the rough, like hard feedback, but like no one else.
Maybe they don't crave it, but they step up the most.
Right. That's fair. That's fair. Right.
But they may not like it.
But in retrospect, they like really appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I think this is a learning, right? Where I think early in your, when you're early in your career as a sales leader, you hire, on some level, maybe it's unconscious, but you hire people that are good, but maybe like you want to be the smartest person in the room, right? And maybe you want to be the most talented person in the room. And I think, the further you get along, you want to hire people that are ideally even better than you, or have more potential than you and more upside from you. And you want people that want to be, VPs of sales and CROs and have that ambition. And some people shy away from that because they think it'll sort of have them sort of unfocus off of like, well, I don't want somebody dreaming about being a VP of sales when they're an account executive today. But in my experience, people with that kind of ambition, very rarely are they unwilling to put the work in if you hire the right people. And so that sort of became, certainly a talk desk. The goal was like, hey, everyone we hire, you want them to have, it may not be a VP of sales, it may be something else, but you want them to have something bigger, something, aspirational, some goal out there, that they want to strive for. That's not just, they don't want to be an account executive for 35 years, right? I think that's a reasonable expectation. And so that's good. You want to hire those, and also people, by the way, that will push you and challenge you and call you out. I want to have those people in the room. The best people that ever worked for me were people that were willing to challenge me and challenge my assumptions and beliefs. I like that. Yeah. All right.
It looks like Robert might be frozen.
Am I frozen?
No, you're good.
Oh, good.
Am I frozen? No. No, I think Robert might be frozen for a second. So let's just give him one more moment. There we go. It looks like he will be rejoining, but I also have your slides, so I can pull them up as well. Always got to have a backup plan. Tip 11.
All right. Slide 4 or slide 9, I guess, on the bottom. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay.
One more. Yeah.
There we go.
So, I think this goes without saying, talent over resume, right? Like resumes are liars in a lot of ways. And, it doesn't tell the story of like, hey, where's this person and their career right now? And, there's a lot of different scenarios in which somebody can be successful. There's a lot of people that walk into incredible scenarios, right? Or they walk into a company where they have, this brand or this recognition sort of behind them, right? At their back. And so like, in the context of like a startup, like the scenario is who's going to come in here and be able to sell a product that no one's ever heard of, maybe for a problem that nobody acknowledged exists. We have no brand recognition and, hey, knock yourself out, right? Sort of scenario. And that's a really hard thing to do. It takes a certain type of person that, is almost like looking for conflict or looking for debate. And it's really, really hard to find it. And oftentimes hiring the resume and saying, oh, this guy was at Salesforce, or this person was at Oracle, or whatever it is. Well, that's great. But like, okay, the question's what next after that? Because, trust me, you're not going to get on a call and say you're from Salesforce here. You're going to get on a call. They've never heard of you. They probably don't want to talk to you. What then? And so, yeah, talent over resume. It's hard. It is hard. The hiring salespeople in a startup is brutally difficult with extraordinarily high turnover rates, for VPs of sales as well. I think I think there's some statistic that like 90+% of first VPs of sales hired in a startup turnover inside of 12 months or less than 12 months. So it's, it's a risk. Plenty of risk.
One thing I hate about Zoom is what just happened to me. So, so we go.
Maybe now that Zoom is a work in the office company, right? We'll get some of these fixed.
I did just want to jump in on this because there was this like story that's so on point here. Like I interviewed this one guy, and he's actually still works with us today. He was a stockbroker, and he was literally hawking stock, like literally selling stocks. No, like not salary, commission only. And like the drive to the previous point Brendan was making, and like the ambition that you saw, like he couldn't even sit in his chair, right? And he just like wanted to win, and he wanted to learn, and he just like wanted to, and so it's like, do you have the raw talent, and do you have that drive? And it's like, we can craft and like train the software piece of it. Yeah. So sometimes when I see companies like, oh, we need software experience, it's like, you don't need software experience. You need somebody that like has the ambition and the drive and the will. And like you can train, it's your responsibility as a VP of sales to train that, right?
Yeah, on some level, right? You'd rather get somebody with the talent and the raw sort of characteristics over maybe somebody that comes in with bad habits, right? Right, because people that come in with bad habits, they're hard to break, right? They're hard to recoach or retrain. Whereas somebody that has the raw talent and you can sort of coach them up and teach them in your way or in the way that works for your company. I think that, is going to work out more times than not. I mean, obviously finding people that have the raw talent is not that easy, but.
Right. And the infamous, like, where are my inbound leads, right? It's like, well, less startups don't have them. So
there's none. All right. 5. Do your due diligence. This is simple. Most people don't do it. 90 out of 100 startups are not going to make it. That's a fact. It might be more than that. That's actually might be an optimistic number. They're not going to make it. It's a high risk environment. And by not making it, it means like, there's some sort of outcome in which, the chairs and the computers are rolled out of the building and into a moving truck, right? Nobody made any money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, that this is why when people are like, oh, I took this job and like, yeah, this founder is impossible. I can't deal with this person, right? His expectations aren't reasonable. And I'm like, you didn't do your due, if you had done some due diligence, right, on this particular person. Some cases you can't do it, by the way, but like you do your due diligence to find out who is this person, right? Like what, where are they coming from? What is it like, what is it like to work for this person? What is the experience others have had? Diligence on the company. Right. And so like people, I think people have this sort of overwhelming optimism, right? If you talk to 100 startups, you think 50 have a chance. And if you say that 90 and 10 have a chance, well, does that change your perspective now? Right. That like, maybe like if I know Robert Lopez or Mark Jacobs or Kevin Gaither or Sam Blond or Brendan Cassidy, right? These people are in my orbit. Get 3 opinions on that company, because I can guarantee you, if you're talking to smart people, not everyone's going to be like, oh, no brainer, do it, right? You're going to get a nuanced analysis of it. And by the way, if you haven't done that, then you are setting yourself up to fail.
This point almost makes me sad sometimes, because it's like I've seen
Robert's default position is no. So every company within 1,000 square miles of him has probably made some sort of inquiry to him. And like,
I've just seen like people, whatever, leave our company or other people I know, like join another company, and they just like, I'm just like, just ask a question, right? Like even people that I like admire and respect that work for me over the years. And like, I try to have open relationship, but it's like, sometimes people throw a carrot out there and like, oh, we're going to pay you X. And you get there, and then sure enough, 12 months later, I get a call and they're like, yeah, you were like, you're right. It's like, look, if you're going to leave, that's fine. Let's have a conversation. I'll try to help find you the right gig, and let's put a transition plan in place and what have you. But I think that like the world is pretty small, and like and there are so many like easy signs, like, all right, what are the investors like? Who are if you can get in touch with like, who are the investors that passed on the deal, right? And like, what did they say? But it can be tough. But it is so important. Or you could just like cold email. If it's an AE role, it's cold email a rep, or cold email somebody else at the company if you're looking for a VP job, and like, what do the reps think? Is it real? Is it not real?
Or just say how many, good question is like, which is just an early sign of traction, is like, how many leads do you have a month, inbound leads, right? That's a great question. I guarantee you, Robert, if he's going to look at something, he's going to ask that question, right? And if the answer is 0, there may, Robert may continue talking to that person, but he's probably not coming. And so, like, I think, how many leads do you have a month? Oh, really? 100? Great. Can you forward something, tell the CEO, hey, can you forward some to me as they come in, or however they're coming in? There's some sort of, web lead to web to lead, sort of thing internally, some email, probably notification. Send some to me. Right. And by the way, if you're a CEO trying to recruit someone like Robert, that's a great way to sort of gain, familiarity and comfort and trust, is just by share some of the good things happening in the company, because right now it's just you saying it about how incredible the opportunity is, or the space is, or whatever else it is, but prove it, right? Show them, hey, like, look, here's a great lead. We just came in, Justworks came in as a lead, which,
and another thing that's like, it's always like, hey, a company's doing whatever 20 and they want to finish the year at 30. But it's like, well, what did they start the year at last year, and what do they want to finish the year? Like, what was the plan last year, and like, where did you get at it? Because a lot of people just focus moving forward, not what the last couple of years look like, and did they hit it? Did they not?
Yeah, the most in demand people, VPs of sales and CROs, are tremendously risk averse. Most people don't understand this, right? They're not going to lean their chin out for you, most likely, and so they're going to do their due diligence, really starting at no, right? So they're doing due diligence, being like, could I do enough due diligence to create an overwhelming case for yes? Which, most CEOs start out with this sort of fantastical vision of who their VP of sales is. I've talked about this a number of times, but like, here's my top 10 list. And like, I'll tell them and say, hey, I can probably help set up a conversation with some of these people, but they're not coming, right? So where's the second list? Where's the list of the people that you might, that actually might be able to come in here and be successful, that you might be able to hire? So, because the best people are going to do a ton of due diligence. A lot of times we'll do it with each other, right? Robert will bounce something off Mark Jacobs to me, Sam Blond. It's a small community, right? A lot of us know each other and respect each other because we know how hard this is. So that's it. That's my fifth. So moving on.
So I think we got questions now, right?
Yes. So we are going to stop screen sharing and move on to some questions from the audience. When you want to kick us off.
Sure. Thanks, Caitlin. And thank you, Robert and Brendan, for sharing the great insights. So I have 3 questions, actually. The first one is, Robert, when it comes to the whole journey of Justworks, how did the go-to-market strategy evolve since when the company was like, 0 to 10 customers and then 10 to 100, 100 to 1,000, and 1,000 above? And how did you know it's time to make changes?
That might be an hour-long podcast in and of itself. I'll see if Robert can distill this down into a couple
30,
minutes.
40 seconds. I mean, like the big thing for us was that like trying to stay focused like early. I think a lot of companies, it's like, and quite frankly, this is probably like on a V2 of this. Like now that I'm talking about it, it was like, what do I wish I knew? It's like you see so much opportunity, and like that company could be a customer, that company. But like the country, we live in a, like, depending on where you're focused, let's say you're focused on the US market to start, it is such a massive market. But it's like, where do you have product market fit? Like, think about the customer adoption curve. Like, where are your innovators? Like, who is going to be that ICP initially? And just go really deep, right? Because there are these referral loops, right? If once you get a couple logos, like there are these referral loops. It's like, oh, like early for us, like Trello was a customer and Casper was a customer. And so I get on the phone and people's like, oh, have you heard of like Trello or Casper? And we were like in New York Tech. And the answer is going to be yes, right? So there you have your proof point, right? And so once we actually like were able to build up that, then we're like, all right, what's the next geo that's going to focus, that we're going to focus on? Let's go deep in that geo. Now we have nuances in our business where like geo and health insurance is very relevant. Like every business has their own thing, but like that, just like really like focusing early. And once we were getting a certain amount of reps at quota, then we would like double down there. And then we would start looking at geo, and we would have these like markets that once they became profitable, then we would go to our next market. Right. And so we would look at it at a market by market profitability level, and that's how we would double down. And then we would just build on that as we grew.
Yeah. And once you get Trello, and then you get the next player sort of behind Trello, right? It becomes this sort of like almost like sort of viral sort of customer loop, right? Where everybody somewhat similar to them, it becomes a huge selling asset for them.
And Michael Pryor was like, we like joked that he was on staff, and he was like, yeah, I've done so many referral calls for you guys. Like, can you like hook me up with something, right? Like, just like those things.
Saying the Justworks sales floor, the Trello and those others, you could probably hear them referenced about 100 times a day, maybe more. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. It sounds like really the landmark logos first, make sure they're successful and happy, and then just expand to the logical.
Yeah, but I think it's like specifically logos that your ICP knows and respects, right? Because like, oh, if they're using this product, then like, oh, it's pretty good. There's like those proof points where it's not just some company that nobody knows in like the space you're going after.
Nice. Cool. So thank you, guys. And the second question I have is, as a sales leader, how do you tell if there is sufficient product market fit for you to thrive in the early days? You guys talk about doing the diligence, but in the early days, I saw, Robert, you joined Justworks like a year after the founding. How do you know like this is going to work out? Like, how do you tell?
I mean, I definitely didn't. I think we had like 6 to 8 months of cash left, but I was just like, well, if it doesn't work out, what's the worst that could happen? Right? I'll go get another job. I think for me, I actually did a really big diligence process. So like a family member has a small business. So I went through the demo process with ADP, with the TriNet, with the Paychecks, and it was so god awful. Like I remember one company sent me a PDF to fill out to like get a quote. And they wouldn't even send me a Word doc. And I was like, all right, you don't even need to build a good product. You just has to be a little bit better than this. And like, I'm confident that I can execute it. And so that was really where I was at. I think it was probably like, maybe a little bit of dumb luck there, but that's the.
Looks like Robert rose again.
He was making a great point though.
Yes.
Man, Zoom every time. Wen, did you have any other questions?
I'll let other folks ask questions. I've already taken up quite a bit of the time. So thank you, Caitlin. Thank you.
No worries. We love it.
Good questions.
Ryan, we are going to move on to you if you would like to ask your questions, and then Raul, I see you in the queue too.
Hi, yeah, thanks for today. I actually got a lot out of this, so I appreciate it. I'm still learning SaaS sales on a daily basis. We, after like 2 years, 3 SDRs and pretty much my life savings, it was clear to me that I had no business building a sales team from scratch. I've always been the lone wolf sales guy in my market that would build cold markets into like $30 million books, but I was literally selling nuts and bolts. So I've never sold software, and thanks to a product pivot in December, we found our true market fit with our clients, and have been fairly successful this year on bringing on large enterprise contracts. And then thanks to SaaStr, I've learned enough to sell our own product myself. But I've got the director of sales role that's ready to be a VP that I'm targeting him for March. So I'm doing the courting. He's at a big enterprise company calling on the oracles, but we work together at an incubator, and he built a sales team from scratch, and he knows SaaS sales. So I've got that stuff figured out. But Jason's always VP of sales, VP of marketing. I learned everything about marketing from Neil Patel. I learned everything about SaaS sales from SaaStr, but I don't know what to do outside of that courting relationship. So I've got that VP of sales potential, but I don't even really know what a CRO or CMO, I don't know who's next. Like, who else should I be courting? I don't have my 5 people. That's the short question. How do I plan for those 5 people?
5 people, I'll answer considering Robert's somewhere else, but yeah, are they 5 like salespeople, like just generally, it rolls generally like beyond sales? Or
no, you mentioned earlier that if Robert were to ever leave his current role, that he has 5 people that he knows he would bring on immediately when he starts.
You have a director of sales, somebody that, oh, I thought you said you were courting somebody.
I'm courting that VP of sales role, but I don't know who else I should be dating on the other sides of that CRO, CMO, that mix of what else do I need next is where I'm missing a gap.
I would say most companies will probably hire like a marketing leader, right? Like, before sales leader. I mean, obviously in a startup, being able to hire a marketing leader that is an expert in driving sort of like top of the funnel, right? Because as you know, right, any sort of organic traction and growth it just relieves a lot of the stress and the pain, right? From having to go 100% outbound's really, really hard, right? Nothing harder, right? Where you're having to tell people, hey, please talk to us, right? Please, we got something to say, right? That's just a hard life to live. So if you can find a marketing leader, VP of marketing, CMO, that is great at sort of demand gen marketing, which by the way, I can give you about 1,000 other companies, right, that are looking for the same thing. It's hard to find.
Right.
If you can find that, then that's a great hire. But I would not hire a VP of marketing if they can't do that at your stage, right? They have highly competent, in my opinion, in demand gen and top of the funnel, because we've read Jason's content. He's got this if your VP of marketing, if all your VP of marketing does is get blue pens or something, right? Yes. So it's one of the best articles he's ever put up. And that's this sort of no inside baseball known thing in the startup community, right? Is you're going to hire a marketing leader and they can't help you in the top of the funnel, then my God, they better be great at some other stuff.
I mean, the other thing is that I don't know exactly your business particularly, but if you do have a lower end segment to invest in a product, like a self-service motion earlier on that can try to help that on ramp. And so I've been leading our initiative there for a while. And those things also take a really long time to play off. But if you can focus your sales organization a little bit further up market and then try to have some type of on ramp, very lightweight, low cost, just to get them in the ecosystem, get them familiar with your types of products that you use, that could be more of a product growth leader to pair, because everyone talks about product led growth, sales led growth. I believe you got to have a marriage between the two. Very few products can exceptionally execute PLG well, but if you have the two that are married, because some buyers they kind of want to talk to somebody. Some buyers don't want to talk to anybody. And it's you got to have the marriage, a really great marriage between the two to successfully execute along that value chain.
And then you talked about you're courting this head of sales candidate. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming you don't want to say their name here. So But this person is this, who are they going to bring with them, right? Which,
I wrote down his 5. That's a question that I'm going to ask is who do you bring on board with you?
It's an opportunity for him or her, whoever it is, right? They get a chance. I'm assuming they're probably not they haven't been a VP of sales for 10 years. Maybe this is their first time. Yep. They get to build the team, right, with the people that they want. And that's a great opportunity for them to really, have a chance to do it with your support. You're the founder, I'm assuming.
Yes.
And if you have the right person, it can be an incredible thing. Assuming you're sure that you. So.
That's all great. I appreciate it. We were fortunate. We were industry experts in mechanical design, from phones to tractors to iPhones. So what y'all call the linoleum, we speak those people's language. And so we had to learn how to sell the CTO. That's what SaaStr taught us. We already knew how to sell the client. The people using our products love it. We just didn't know how to convince the VP of finance to purchase it. And that's where we've kind of grown. But now we're getting marketing opportunities through PR, and we're trying to capitalize on that. But getting some sort of funnel introduction path of bringing in potential clients into a world that they can trial, learn, experience, courses, that's the gap that I'm currently trying to fill. So you guys were spot on. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Our next question, Raul.
Hi, guys. Thank you to have me here. I'm Rahul. I'm the Director of Customer Success at Recruit CRM. So I had a question around RevOps. Basically, I've set up basic infrastructure or the basic report or dashboards there. Although I'm struggling to find out what are the real statistics that we need to look at in order to understand the journey of the customer, the cost of acquisition, and things like that. So would you have any suggestions for me how I can initiate building up that kind of maybe a team of RevOps? I think, Robert, you mentioned that.
I think that, one of the things that I think a lot of companies fail at is that they have they build their stages, and their stages are kind of rep dependent. So it's a rep says, oh, I'm interested. The next stage, it's I'm a big believer. They need to be very binary. And so what quantifying aspect does the company, does the company need to do something? Do they need to fill something out? Do they need to submit something? Do they actually have to have an action where it's not rep dependent? And so maybe they have to fill out a document or whatever it is. And so making sure the stages are very quantifiable and measurable, and then ensuring that velocity and throughput is measured. A lot of companies don't, they're all about generating pipeline. But it's what is the velocity of that pipeline? That's harder to measure, right? And what is the age of that pipeline? And what's the throughput? Is the velocity moving through across the year in the way it should? And trying to kind of layer on certain type of predictive analytics around it once you have enough data and statistical modeling in order to do so. But I think that first and foremost, it's what is the tooling that if you're just using Salesforce today, there are different types of the scale of your business, but I think it's just at a high level, it's nail the stages, ensure you have the backup data to prove it, and then you can start layering on more sophisticated tooling to understand what the velocity looks like.
Right. Yeah, I think we're using HubSpot at the moment. Although me personally, our department uses Custify as a CS platform. So I'm kind of trying to build some different dashboards for that in a different tool that could actually help them understand how much cost of acquisition do we have for a customer, and basically what kind of incentive plan should we go in order to make sure that we are retaining those customers and things like that. Again, something to be fair for our sales reps as well as CS reps. So I'm just trying to figure that out. I had one more question around again, our CS team. I know they're not exactly salespeople, although I want them to target more on expanding their businesses around different affiliates. Let's say if we have a recruiting agency who's our customer, but they would have some affiliates in different countries. So should they reach out to those affiliates, or should we have salespeople jump in and help the CSMs to reach out to those people?
What do you mean by affiliates? Sorry.
So let's say we have a company who's based in US, they have some affiliates or partners, let's say in India or in Spain somewhere.
Yeah.
So, right. So again,
yeah, I mean, I think that if you're having your CSM should be focused on like just making sure the customer is like the most incredibly happy. It almost sounds like this is like a channel. Like I was talking a little bit earlier about channel strategy. Like it sounds like that might be an opportunity if you think that like, you know, what, because different partners are motivated by different things. Some partners like want a rev share. Some partners just want to make their clients look good and offering them a great tool. And there's some type of referral moment there. But like, I think for customer success, like they just need to be exclusively focused on like how, like, you know, on referral loops, right? How can they be generating referrals? How can they just make sure upon renewal, like that your product is the best thing like out there and they're willing to like scream it from the rooftops, and like measuring things like customer effort score, CSAT, NPS, like just maniacally, like very, very like we have like a quality team in our CS organization that like measures the quality of customer interactions, because at scale it's very hard to do. And so like those are the things, and like, and you can measure like the success there about like our company's referring and how is that working out. But it sounds like you might need that might be like a role specifically focusing on like an affiliate channel.
For how big you guys are. So I'm like how many employees versus like, you know, how much capital and all that kind of stuff. And hiring a partner person is like, with that, I'm assuming you have a VP of sales, but all usually would sort of roll up to a VP of sales. But sometimes what they own sort of sits in this, you know, between the raindrops, so to speak. And so, but like, I definitely think leaning into a partner sort of specific role earlier is like sort of a reality now. It's a smart thing to do, because, you know, everyone's looking for, you know, a way to diversify, like I think Robert talked about, or diversify your top of the funnel and demand gen strategy. That's a real channel.
Brendan, Robert, I know we're at time. Can we sneak in one more question?
Of course we can.
Okay. In today's more efficient world, do reps need to close more to make their OTEs? If so, how have you helped folks adjust? I'm not sure many have fully.
Yeah, well, I think that we're not finding that they need to like close more. What we're finding, it takes more activities to like more outbound activity to generate the same amount of pipeline, right? So like that's like statistically, like we've like looked across the funnel and like that, at least on the outbound flow. And so like I think that they don't need to say close more. They need to kind of, you know, work harder basically to generate it. And so we've been trying to like, you know, ensure that we have a balanced demand gen strategy. And so we've been investing a little bit more on our partner channel to kind of help alleviate some of that there. And so we've like created certain incentives in certain sub partner channels to try to create more demand to kind of buffer some of that, because we don't want to like make sure the reps are like too overworked. You know, sales development like has become quite a commodity. Like we actually use, I'm a big believer in it, but it's like everybody's like, it's just spray and pray type of situation right now. And so like there's a lot of noise. And so we kind of view sales development almost as like a way for us to create opportunity for the company and pipeline, but also create opportunity for the reps and future account executives. Like, so we view that as a farm system for Justworks. That's almost like first and foremost. And it also generates a lot of business. But I think you need to like get creative around different types of strategies right now, because the fact of the matter is it's just taking a lot more work to generate the same amount. We've actually seen close rates go up a little bit actually lately, after like a slow Q1, but it's just taking a little bit longer. Sales cycles have extended a little bit.
Yeah, I'd say there's a very sort of dynamic conversation happening with VPs of sales right now, right? Where, you know, sort of the traditional of like your SDR team owns all of it, right? Sort of, you know, where your SDR owns this massive, you know, sort of whatever you want to call it, qualified leads, meetings number, whatever it is. And your salespeople are just sort of waiting for their calendars to be filled up. And I think it's, you know, sort of a concept. There's a guy named Scott Lees, who I'm friends with, who everyone's probably heard of before. He's a very active LinkedIn content producer, but it's called the full stack AE, right? Where your account executives are going to have to own some of the burden to drive the top of the funnel. Because, you know, and actually attacking the top of the funnel more strategically than just let's send 150,000 cadences or, cold calls and all that. Like there's a lot of value to be had by doing that. And it's very topical right now and relevant. And the best VPs of sales are having this conversation now every day, and you better be.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
since day one for us, we've focused there. Like, I'm a big believer that, AEs need to be like hunters first, and they're managed to generating a certain amount of self-sourced opportunities. This goes like years back, because like you never know when some of those channels are going to dry up. And so like you want to be able to like control your destiny.
Don't want them doing it the same way you're
Oh, fully not. Yeah. No, we focus big on referral. Like that's, so one of like a small hack we did early on, which was really successful, was like, we basically said after an AE closes a deal, we set up some nurture campaigns to the AE saying, hey, your customer signed on 60 days ago, 120 days ago, as like a reminder for them to check back in with their customer. Hey, is it like what I thought what I said it was going to be? How are you enjoying the product? Just as like an easy way for them to follow up. And at that point, if they were having a good experience, it was a great opportunity to like ask for a referral. And it's hard for an AE to organize that. And so we just tried to like give them like almost an internal cadence, like as a way for them to like get a reminder to basically build that book of business over time and generate referrals, because, referrals for us close at 50-60% close rate, which is a lot. I mean, I'd rather like, have two opportunities, right? And like to get there rather than 4 to 5. And so we tried to just like embed that and like the cultural, like systematize that in the system.
Yeah.
Referrals are a great thing to embed into your go-to-market, recruiting, everything that you're doing. People don't do it enough, to be frank. And it's a force multiplier. Things that come through people or vouch for people whether it's hiring or selling or whatever it is. It's really not, it's lower hanging fruit than, let's go cold call 1,000 founders or VPs of sales or whatever it is. Like they're not picking the phone up. Right? And there definitely are people out there that are still living in that world of like, I roll my sleeves up. I got my coffee cup, like it's Glengarry Glen Ross, and I'm going to bang out, 500 cold calls today. But, and God bless the people that can make a living off that, but it's not enough. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, everyone has to hop off of this call and go get some referrals. So with that, thank you so much, Brendan and Robert. That was an awesome session. So much positive feedback in the chat. We really appreciate your time and your 10 tips. Next week, we have raising capital in 2023, what it takes to raise in the current market, and the data to prove it. So we will see you all next week. And thank you again, Brendan and Robert.
Thanks, everybody.